No, this is my lathe that you've seen on all the videos. It's happens to be a 1950 Model B, which means that it's power feed, power longitudinal, power cross feed, but it's change gears. So I managed to get a complete quick change gearbox from a Model A, including the banjo. There's one problem with this, is that this one is from, as you can see here, a 4-foot bed, and I have a 4.5-foot bed, which means that the lead screw that came with it is physically too short to fit across the entire bed, but the end of my Model B is too long to fit in the gearbox. The gearbox fits right here, as you can see the difference in the ends here. Should be somewhere in that area there. So I have to basically shorten that lead screw and put another collar on it, and then I have to, this shoulder will have to be cut, this groove will have to be cut, these threads will have to be cut, this key will have to be pressed in place, this will have to be moved down further on that shaft, and that cut to the right length. Now, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that with my equipment here. Obviously I don't have a mill, so cutting the key slot is kind of not really that much of an option. And also, once I take this off, this actually does hold the apron and everything, not necessarily together, but it holds it in place, so this is going to be a little floppy. So I don't think I'm going to be able to do that in my lathe. I can do it in another lathe, or I may have to have somebody do that for me. But before I even get to that point, first things first is we got to rebuild this. Now, just a quick note on if you want to do this mod. If you have a Model B, you would need a new lead screw, and you would also need to drill a third hole in like this area here to fit that third screw. And you'll also need a 40 tooth and a 20 tooth stud gear that doesn't come with the Model B. Now, I happen to have the 40 tooth, which is still on the banjo, but I'm missing the 20 tooth. Now that's pretty more enough easy to get, and it's only cost me like 10-15 bucks. Now there is a couple of problems with this here. That lead screw, now that I got you a little bit more of a stable position here, that lead screw fits in through this hole here. I've already taken out just to be able to move this around, and on the inside is attached this gear. So if you buy just the gearbox alone, you'll also need this gear that goes on that lead screw. Now, there's a few minor problems with this besides it being filthy, and sorry for the jiggling camera, but it's attached to my workbench here. This banjo, more than likely this banjo is just out a little bit too far. If you look right here, it doesn't show up very well, but this gear is out further than this one, which is making this guard, which you can see right there, this guard here is actually rubbing up against that gear. You can actually hear it a little bit when I turn it. Now you can see there's a groove worn in here from this gear, so somebody did run it like this. Plus everything in here is pretty much, the whole works is pretty gummed up. These plungers won't reset themselves in the hole, but everything does move. It's hard to move these to the side. As you can see, if I turn it over, these handles slide along the shaft. It's hard to move them from just the handle, but if I push them from here, they move pretty easily. So more than likely, once I get this all cleaned up, we'll be able to, everything will move freely. Now there's also another little problem in here. Now, nothing to do with the gears. All the gears are intact, but I notice the more and more I look at this, you see this here, this is grease, or dried grease. Somebody used grease to lubricate these, which is not really a good thing. It has a gits on the top that'll allow you to oil this. Plus, let me see if I can get it out. Actually, in here is what looks like a part of the casting is actually, if I can get it out intact, which I probably won't be able to. Nope, there it is. That is a petrified felt wick. Now this is why when you get a used piece of equipment, or one that's been sitting for a while, or you don't know when the last time it was serviced, you want to take it apart and replace these. I mean, hello? I mean, you could hear it. This is hot as a rock. So there's a bunch of these in there too. So we're going to start taking all this apart, getting all this together, plus and degreasing all of these gears in some purple power. We're just going to let it soak in full strength. That should get a lot of this garbage off. Also, there's about 5 coats of paint on here, or at least 4. There's a red, there's like a neon greenish, there's the Southbend greenish gray, and then there's some sort of like cream color mixed in there too. So all the paint's going to be stripped off. Also, you can see, although the front here is readable, it's supposed to be colored. It used to be black and red at one point in its life, which it no longer is. And they do sell replacements for that. A person actually makes printed versions of this on the metal. So I'm going to see if I can get my hands on one of those too. So in the meantime, let's just kind of pull it apart here. Let's see what we go. So let me grab some wrenches and we'll start separating. Alright, now that we got all the banjo and everything else there off, we'll get some gloves just because this thing's so caked with so much grease. This thing's pretty much taper pin hell. Everything in here is held in with straight pins and taper pins, so make sure you have a decent assortment of punches, because you're going to need them. And be careful with them. If you break one off, it'll turn out to be a really bad day. So first thing I'm going to do is take off the shaft that holds the levers. And there is a pin right in this hole here, which goes to the top. Let's see if we can get it out. My punch wasn't long enough to get it through. I just had to tap the rest of it through with the nail. But there's the pin. So now we're going to drive this shaft out. Hopefully. There's one arm off. there's the shaft itself, and actually, yeah, how much stuff's in there. Now I'm not sure if this whole thing is supposed to be felt or not. I'll find out. I put that in the bucket. Actually, here's a felt that came out of it. Here's another piece too. Alright, so and there's the other one apart. You can see all actually you can see how caked that is. That's all grease. That's just all grease. You can see the outline of the gear, and the rest of this is just grease. So all that's going to be cleaned. Same thing with this one here. Now, as you can see, the other gear only rides up to that grease line, so I wonder, I mean, after I clean this off, we'll see the wear in it. If this side's a little worn, I bet you can just flip it around and let it run on the unworn side. And these are held in here by a shaft. We'll come to those later on. Come back to those. Now everything else in here is held in by taper pins also. There's a taper pin here on this shaft underneath all this goo. There's another taper pin here on the tip. All that comes out to get this tree out. So I'm going to take this tree out first so you can see. Let me get zoomed in here. You can see the taper pin right there. There's one end. And there's the other. You can see this side is bigger than that side, so it has to be driven out through this way. And that taper pin, like always, is not cooperating, so let me get something to soak it with. A little bit of penetrating oil, maybe a little bit of heat. We'll get her out. Alright, finally got it out. I actually had to drill the end out of the taper pin a little bit and heat it up, and I finally got it to drive out. I destroyed the taper pin, but that's no big deal. I just got another one. The one on the end of this shaft came right off, so that's easy enough. So I just pull this shaft out here. I want to keep all these gears together in the way they came off. So I'll just thread them through a piece of wire, and we want to drive this out. So actually I left my punch outside because I had it heated up. Let me grab my punch. Alright, my punch back. And we should just be able to drive this off into that direction there. And again, we want to try to keep our gears together in the same order they came off. And I know that the white one came off of this. And then these slide right off. And we'll keep those together with a piece of wire. Here's the shaft here. You can see all the buildup of crud in there. That's actually a wick right there. Now the other thing I want to do is take off this nameplate here, which is retained by these little rivet things. Now they go through and they're kind of like in their own little hole. If I can clean the gunk out of them here. Usually you can find them. There's one right there. Now, I don't know if these other ones go all the way through. They might not. Nope, they don't look like they do. Well, they don't feel like they do. And there's the last one. So now everything's all out. Now we just gotta degrease and clean everything, which you've seen me do, so there's no need of me filming all that. Oh, forgot one last thing. Ooh, those are on there tight. I'll get an impact wrench and just get those off. Last thing I need to do, that was a wick inside those, is get this gear off here. Now these are just pressed in place, so if I just take that, and those come right out. Now, you can see in there, those are bearings. Right in here. That's a bearing. All that has to be cleaned out. Make sure that's still intact. Seems okay. So, now the last step is just getting everything cleaned up. So let me get to that. I'm going to soak it in everything that's in that bucket. I'm going to soak it in some purple power. That'll dissolve most of the grease and nasties, and I should be able to just scrub the rest off. And to get the paint off, I'm going to use the Easy Off like I've been doing in those other videos. So let me get to that.